Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Dalit Horn, and I'm the Executive Director at the Vilna Shul, Boston Center for Jewish Culture. The Vilna, located in historic Beacon Hill, is the last remaining immigrant-era synagogue building in Boston and now serves as a center for Jewish engagement. We offer opportunities to connect and explore one's culture, experience the arts, and engage in big ideas and pressing issues facing Boston's Jewish community. We are thrilled to be hosting tonight's conversation on the current state of affairs for refugees and asylum seekers, along with our esteemed partners, CJP, Catholic Charities, JCRC Boston, and Jewish Family Services of Metro West. Together, these Boston-based organizations are driving an enormous amount of the Afghan resettlement activity in our region. And for that, we are all extraordinarily grateful to you for your leadership and service. Our program this evening will begin with an overview on the state of immigration by Melanie Nezer, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, followed by a brief description of the Afghan resettlement work taking place in Greater Boston. After these two presentations, we'll open up the program to the public for a Q&A with our panelists. At that moment, we're also going to be welcoming two people from Catholic Charities and from JFS Metro West to be joining for the discussion. Before we get started, I wanted to clarify a few housekeeping rules. First, this program will be recorded and posted to the Vilna's YouTube channel shortly after tonight's program. Second, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat below, and we'll make sure to ask it during our conversation with our panelists. And lastly, all participants will be muted during this program, given the size of the program we're having tonight. Over 300 people registered to be with us this evening. And without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce Melanie Nezer. Melanie's bio is on the event page of our website and will be pasted in the chat in just a moment. Melanie, thank you.
Thank you, Dalit, and thank you to the Vilna Shul for hosting this event. And thank you to my amazing local partners that do so much amazing work resettling and welcoming immigrants and refugees in this area. And also thank you to all of you for joining. I know many of you are from the Boston area, as am I. So I'm always happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk to you at this really critical time. I think everybody's thinking right now about Afghan refugees. So we all saw the horrific and dramatic evacuation this summer. And I think most of you know that there are still 54,000 or so Afghans who are on military bases across this country, waiting for a chance to be resettled into communities across the country. So this is really, I don't want to say unprecedented, because we've had moments like this in history before, but I don't think there's really been one of this scale since the Vietnam War. So this is a really critical time to really think about how we together can welcome refugees into our communities. But it's not just the Afghan situation. We've had a lot of kind of, controversy and conflict and really difficult politics around immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers for many years, most kind of dramatically in the last 4 or 5. But this is nothing new. I mean, there's been, our immigration history, as you all know, going back particularly in the Jewish community, there were times where the US was more welcoming and times when the US really shut its doors. There were times when the political rhetoric was quieter and times when the political rhetoric was ramped up. So we're just in a time where a lot of these different factors are coming together in really kind of interesting and somewhat unusual ways. There's a lot of support across the country for welcoming Afghan refugees right now. I think because people tend to know what their story is and what they escaped and what the US role was in that or is in that. But there's also a lot of fear, and that gets stoked quite a bit politically, and that's not going away. And there's also COVID, which makes a lot of this work very complicated and difficult. And then there's just the kind of overall state of the world. There's 85 million people who are displaced right now, more than at any time in recorded history. And given just, that's a huge number, but Boston has about 4.3 million people in it. So it's like 20 Bostons of people that are displaced. 26, I think it's like 28 million of those now are refugees. So people who were displaced internally because of persecution, often stemming from violence, conflict, war, who have fled their country and are seeking refuge in another country. So that's a specific definition of somebody who's fled, a refugee. There are asylum seekers, so people who are seeking protection in another country once they get there. So asking for protection there and asking for the protection directly of the government. These terms are confusing partly because they're applied a little bit differently in the United States than they are in the rest of the world. So just to get clear, in the US, we have immigrants are people who come from other places to live in our country. We have people who are refugees, and those are people in the US who came through the official US Refugee Resettlement Program, which is a program that's run by 9 agencies, nonprofit agencies, most of which are faith-based. So HIAS is the Jewish one. We have Catholic Charities, I think, on the line. Their national organization is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We have an evangelical organization. We also have non-sectarian organizations like the International Rescue Committee. And the 9 of us for the last 40 plus years have been working with the U.S. government to bring to, when the U.S. identifies refugees abroad, help them integrate into communities across the country. So that's the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. And the people who come through that program to the U.S. are refugees because they came through this official program with a particular status. Once they come to the U.S. through the national agencies, our local partners like JFS and Catholic Charities and others will welcome them at the airport, set up their houses, get the kids enrolled in school. I'm sure you'll hear more about that. So that's one way that people come here, people who have fled persecution and violence. Another way is to be an asylum seeker. So an asylum seeker is somebody who either shows up in an airport or what we see more in the news these days, shows up at our southern border and says, I am being persecuted. If you send me back to my country, I face persecution based on my race, my religion, my nationality, my political beliefs, or my social group. So please don't send me back to my country where I could be hurt or killed. And those are people who, because of the circumstances where they live, take it upon themselves. They can't wait for the refugee program. Very few people are ever resettled through that program. So they show up at the border and they say, please protect me and don't send me back to my country. Those are asylum seekers in this country. And we have 1 million asylum seekers, I think at least 1 million applications pending in this country. We also have a lot of controversy down at the southern border where people are trying to access protection in the US. This is a US law and it's an international law that requires us to allow people to present their claims to show that they would be harmed if returned to their country. And right now we're actually, through our policies, our laws haven't changed, but our policies since the last administration has been to keep people from accessing asylum in our country. And that's still happening very much right now. I think many of you saw the stories. I know Boston has a very large and vibrant Haitian community. So I'm sure this was in the news here, that a number of Haitians were trying to seek asylum at our southern border. Some were allowed to do that, but many others were turned back or even sent back to Haiti. So that's another way that people kind of access our country trying to seek protection. And then there's this new category you're probably hearing about, which is parolees, which is a terrible word. It's a neutral word in immigration law. But when we think parole, sometimes we think people getting out of prison for something that they may have done. But the Afghan parolees are not people who did anything wrong. They're people who came to this country without a status because they were brought here so quickly that there wasn't any time to give them refugee status or even any other kinds of permanent status or even semi-permanent status. So those parolees don't really have any legal status until the government acts. So those parolees that are on our bases, and we can talk more, I'm sure there's questions about that, but they're on 8 bases around the country right now, waiting to get resettled in local communities. We are working very hard to make that happen. Those people can get off the bases. They actually do have public benefits in the same way that refugees and people who have asylum have those benefits because of a law that was recently passed, which was a very difficult challenge, but that we all working together got through Congress last month. They do have the benefits, but they don't have the legal status. So there's a bill that's pending called the Afghan Adjustment Act. And what that would do, and the reason that's important is because the Afghan parolees that are here, the people on the bases, and there are likely to be more to come, cannot get refugee status. They could get asylum status, but they would have to go through the entire proceedings. It's an administrative law proceeding, and then there's judicial proceedings if the person's not successful. It's a huge amount of resources, when really what they need is to be able to apply directly for legal permanent residence or green cards. So you are going to see a lot from us about supporting and advocating for the Afghan Adjustment Act. So please take us up on that when we ask you, because that is something that really needs to happen for people. Then what else was I asked to address? There's so much. So HIAS, I haven't even told you about HIAS. I hope many of you do know about HIAS. We probably, given the audience that I'm speaking to, touched many of your families over the last 140 or so years that we've been around. We were founded in, we think, the 1880s. We're trying to get to the bottom of that. We know we were founded in New York at Ellis Island. We were meeting Jews who were coming in to Ellis Island, seeking many of the same things that people are seeking today: safety, opportunity, welcome. And we would bring a kosher meal. We would connect them with potential employers. If there were young travelers by themselves, we would try to get them families to stay with. So that's where we started, you know, on the Lower East Side, way over 100 years ago. And now we are in 16 countries. We are an international humanitarian organization acting, we are a Jewish organization, so acting through our Jewish values and our Jewish history to help people who need it. What we often say, I didn't make this up, it's too good. A former chair of HIAS said it. We used to help refugees because they were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are Jewish. And so we do that by working in the US, resettling refugees, and now launching hopefully some new and innovative programs to more directly engage the Jewish community in synagogues and sponsoring refugees directly, because it's all hands on deck right now. So that's some of our domestic work. We're on both sides of the US-Mexico border. We're helping asylum seekers. We're giving legal services, prevention of gender-based violence and treatment of victims of gender-based violence, mental health services. So we're very active. Those services, particularly on the Mexico side of the border. In Mexico right now, we're hosting Afghan families in Mexico City who ended up there because, you know, again, like many of our own family stories, they ran to where they could get to, and many got to Mexico. And we're hoping that some of them will be able to come to the United States. And we are actually the largest refugee service provider in Latin America. We're in countries across the region, providing legal services, GBV, as I mentioned, mental health services, and economic integration. So helping people get jobs, helping people get training, get microloans, and during COVID, get cash so that they could actually support themselves and put food on the table. And we have some programs also in Africa, and we are in Israel working with asylum seekers there. So really a global reach. And really, we're very proud of what we've become and what we're doing in the name of Jewish values to help those who are seeking persecution. So the other thing I was asked to address is kind of, you know, looking ahead. Everything, it seems like on immigration, there's some kind of a crisis or some kind of a media event, and there's some kind of reaction, and maybe Congress will make some noise, but we actually haven't had any major immigration legislation. And I'm saying, you know, really major. I mean, there's been some laws that addressed like making deportation easier during the kind of anti-crime congressional spree in the 90s. And there were some other, the USA Patriot Act actually also had a big impact on immigration law and created the Department of Homeland Security. But really a law that addressed all aspects of immigration law since the 80s, since President Ronald Reagan. So it's really time for Congress to really create some kind of law. And I don't want to say comprehensive because politically that may not be feasible, but really some set of, or some approach that reflects today's realities, the kind of labor that we need, the stature that the US has in the world as a humanitarian leader, which we abdicated over the last several years and should be taking back. Really, so it's our, you know, education, training the future thinkers of tomorrow, many of whom come from overseas. All of that should be overhauled. Addressing the dreamers that I'm sure you've all heard of, making sure that people who have been in this country since they were babies and are now in their 20s and 30s have legal status, and not just because a president wants it or doesn't want it, but because Congress has passed a law. So there are all kinds of things that need to happen. I am pessimistic in the short term of any of that happening. I mean, I'd be happy to see the Afghan Adjustment Act, quite frankly, pass these days, the way Congress is, not really in a position to do anything major and productive, although maybe we have a little bit of a boost, who knows, but that's what's needed. Immigration laws and asylum laws that reflect today's reality and continue to provide protection. Our domestic laws and international laws require us to not turn back people to persecution. Those laws grew out of the Holocaust. They are about 70-something years old. They have been really, not just in the United States, but really rolled back in recent years. And that's incredibly dangerous and something we should all be concerned about. So I don't want to end on something negative, but I think we'll have a lot to talk about. And I do want to hear from my colleagues too. So I will turn it back to you, Dalit.
Great. Thank you so much, Melanie. At this point, I wanted to turn it over to Rachie from JCRC in Boston. Rachie, feel free to turn on your camera at this point, who's going to help frame the Afghan resettlement efforts that are happening here in the area. And then when Rachie is done with her presentation, she's really speaking on behalf of a coalition, and I'm sure that'll come out in her comments. But we also are lucky to have Margie from Catholic Charities and Lucia from JFS Metro West with us. And so they're going to be joining us when it's time for the Q&A. I also at this point just want to remind everybody that in the chat, you have the ability to send a question to the panelists, and it doesn't have to pop up for everybody. And I will be moderating the discussion. So if you would like to have questions for Melanie or for others, just feel free to put them in. Otherwise, I'm going to just hand it over to Rachie.
Thanks so much, Dalit. So good to be with you all and hear from you, Melanie, to paint this broader picture, because locally we're focused so much on Afghan resettlement, which I'm going to share about, but I think that always must exist within this broader context of refugees and asylum seekers that are in need all over, and whatever muscles that we are building locally around supporting Afghan humanitarian parolees. Much of that strength comes from past work with other immigrant populations in need, and hopefully will strengthen us for continued work with more and more immigrant populations. So I'm from JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. I'm an organizer. The reason that I'm involved in this work is because we have these amazing resettlement agencies who've been doing this work for so long in the Boston area, in Metro West. We have JFS of Metro West, we have Catholic Charities, and they do the work of resettling refugees. But as we know, a lot of the infrastructure that has been used to resettle refugees over the past many years has been really decimated because there haven't been refugees coming. And so we're in this moment where there are so many families in need who are coming, and we're asking so much of our agencies, but the case managers aren't there. The infrastructure isn't there in the same way. And faith communities, Jewish communities are really, really well positioned to help step in and be partners and use some of the organizing locally that has existed in the past, some of the development of skills around supporting immigrant populations, and just our own histories of many of us being immigrants, our families having our own immigration stories. We are well set up to be partners in opening our own communities and our own doors and supporting families that are in deep, deep need right now. And so the way that this is working locally is that Catholic Charities, JFS of Metro West are saying, are saying to like the federal government, we're able to take people, we're going to find community sponsors within our local communities. And in some cases it's synagogues, in some cases it's Catholic parishes, in some cases it's UU churches. And all of our communities are really stepping in and saying, we can help provide housing, we can help with on the ground community support, we can help take people to the grocery store and get kids enrolled in schools in partnership with these resettlement agencies. And we have a lot of people that are coming to Massachusetts. The situation locally, we've heard the numbers nationally from Melanie, which is really helpful, but locally we have about 9 resettlement agencies who have collectively said we can bring in 1,000 people. In our coalition of Catholic Charities, JFS, JCRC, we're supporting a few hundred people, and several families, tens of families who are coming in. And we need these teams, we need these synagogues, we need these churches, we need these faith communities to really be able to do a lot of the on the ground work to handle the amount of people who are coming at once. You know, we've started, some of you on this webinar might even already be a part of participating congregations who have already welcomed families. And it's happening really quickly. You know, we started building our coalition a few months ago, and families are here. Congregations have done fundraising. They've started to find housing. Many Afghan families and singles have moved in and are starting their lives here with us within our local communities. And the partnership with faith communities really creating some of this groundwork in support of the resettlement agencies that are carrying so much of the load has been something that's made that really possible. And something that we've learned in supporting a lot of these folks who are coming is that we are supporting such varied families, individuals, people from rural parts of Afghanistan, urban parts of Afghanistan, and speaking Pashto, speaking Dari, some speaking a little bit of English, some speaking no English. And one thing that I've really learned is that you hear stories about who you might think is coming, what you think their background might be. And the reality is always more complicated than what we hear in the news, what we might expect. And so just one thing that I've been really amazed at is the resilience of the people who are coming in these really intense situations from all this instability, and also the resilience of communities that are saying, we're going to step up, we're going to do this work together, we're going to say yes to whoever it is that comes to our door, or the airport that we then meet them at. I know that Melanie mentioned the airport moments, and that's really been some of the first moments that both the resettlement agencies and also the sponsoring communities have been able to meet these families. And they've been these really, beautiful moments of families really stepping into being in a place where there's a community there to care for them. I know that many of the teams and resettlement folks have been bringing balloons and cards and just really trying to make it clear to people coming from very, very harrowing conditions that we are here to be your community. We are here to support you. And as faith communities, we have been able to really step in and offer some more grounding in that welcoming message. And so I know many of you are here in the Boston area. We have about 30 teams that represent a variety of different congregations, some from the Jewish community, some from the Catholic community, some from other communities. And so if you want to be involved in some of this work, it's very possible that your local congregation is already involved. And and I'm sure Margine and Lucia, who you'll hear from soon as well, we'd be happy to be in touch with you and connect around what might actually already be happening that you might be able to get connected to. And I also just want to say, I think I said this at the beginning, I know Melanie has said this, but just to really highlight it, this is a moment where we are all, our eyes are all really glued to what has been happening in Afghanistan and on these army bases, and watching as families arrive all over the US, all over the world, seeking safety. And this moment is, you know, there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that's needed to support these families. We also know, of course, that we need to be supporting our Haitian neighbors and so many other refugee and asylum seeker populations who are going to be coming at different moments. And hopefully the work that we do in this moment, this groundswell moment where so much interest is coming up to support these folks, hopefully we can leverage that to build deep wells of support for these Afghan families and people. And hopefully we can also use that to really build continued support for refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants of all stripes who are seeking refuge in our country.
Great, thank you so much, Rachie. At this point, I'm going to invite Lucia, Margie, and Melanie to turn on your cameras. Hi, nice to see you. It's been a few minutes. Melanie. Melanie, I think we still can't see you. We can tell that you are unmuted, but not your video yet.
Yeah, so. The host has stopped my video. Okay, now I can do it.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, thank you all so much for being here with us. I wanted to get us started, and the first question is probably for Margie or Lucia, and feel free to introduce yourselves at the beginning when you speak, but how do resettlement agencies, congregational teams, and volunteers prepare for supporting families from such a different culture and context? How do you do it?
I'll jump in, Margine. So I'm Lucia Panicella. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Partnerships at JFS. And we have been doing resettlement since the agency's inception, but also provide many other services to the Metro West community here. And I think, you know, I sort of laugh with this because this is a big question, and something that our volunteers are always really wanting more and more information about, and something that we do spend a lot of time on. There's a couple of different ways that I would answer this, and one is to think a little bit about you know, staff capacity and what we do as an institution. So, you know, it's always important that we consider having staff who have knowledge of the culture, who speak the language, you know, of the clients that we're resettling, and that, you know, as an institution, we're making also connections in the community to, you know, in this instance, it could be local Islamic centers, or in other instances, it might be another kind of institution like that. And that we're working really hard to make sure that we have staff and that we have institutional connections that are going to support that kind of work. But a lot of what we've been doing and a lot of what I've been spending time on recently is working with the community and working with volunteers and people who are so generously raising their hands and saying that they want to help, but also feel a little bit like they don't know exactly how to help, or they're unsure about whether they're going to say the right thing or do the right thing. And so absolutely, we encourage them to, you know, read and participate in webinars, and we provide information. But one of the things that I talk the most about is cultural humility. I mean, really encouraging folks to remember a few different things related to that. I mean, one is that one of the best ways that we can learn about other cultures and other people and the individuals that we're working with is to speak with them and ask them questions and to interact with them, to listen to what they have to say. And that I really encourage that. I encourage them to receive information as context, but then to also remember that each family that comes is going to be different. They're going to express and appreciate their culture in a different way, and that we need to be prepared for welcoming them as individuals or as an individual family, and to consider that cultural humility, to consider our also, you know, being aware of our own biases, and then thinking about how that might affect how we're going to approach the work. So yes, we want to have that information, but also thinking so much about that human connection, and really learning from the individuals who come and embracing that opportunity.
Great. Marge, is there anything you want to add? No pressure. Okay, great. The next question I had was, why are faith communities set up to do this work? I know Melanie spoke a bit to, how and why HIAS was founded. Melanie, I loved the quote you had, that you said someone had made about, supporting Jews, and now it's because we are Jewish. But I would love to hear a little bit more about why you feel faith communities in particular are positioned to do this work. Margie, I see you unmuted. I'll let you go.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dalit, and to the Vilna Shul. This is a real honor for me to be on a panel with some of my very close friends now that we've gotten very close over the last couple of months. But excuse me, my name is Margine. I'm the direct vice president of Catholic Charities Refugee and Immigrant Division, which does encompass refugee resettlement, but also our work with unaccompanied migrant children, immigration legal services, and a community interpreter program. And, just like our friends at HIAS and at JFS, we too have been doing this work of serving refugees and immigrants since our founding, right? So Catholic Charities here in Boston was founded in 1903 to serve the immigrant communities coming in at that time, which were not welcome, but now are some of the very same people that are giving back to us now 4 and 5 years, 5 generations later. And so I really appreciated all of Melanie's comments and your context, and especially I would really be remiss if I didn't mention, and also with Rachie saying that, we need to build a well to serve a lot of refugees and immigrants right now, and particularly our Haitian brothers and sisters. Catholic Charities has a very long tradition of serving Haitians, especially in the Boston area, because of our being the third largest diaspora of Haitians. And we actually serve more Haitians right now than we're serving Afghans or any other immigrant group, and a population that is in dire need of all of our support. So I did just want to make sure that we touch on that as well. And I'll move to the question in a second, but I will also say, Melanie, when you mentioned the comment about serving because you're Jewish, we have the same thing in the Catholic faith too. We talk about serving because we're Catholic, not because someone else is Catholic. So I'm glad that this is yet again one more universal truth that we are all seeing amongst our faiths as we work together. And so we here at Charities have found that engaging with faith communities, and specifically, an organized congregation or parish, really helps from practical reasons, right? You've got an entity of people, a body of people that can be trained and deployed, and a large enough membership to be teams. And so I think if any of our partners are on this webinar with us now, they would say, well, it's not just 3 or 4 people that is required to do this work. It's like 20 to 30, and each person plays their own role in that, even if it's, if the person is just the grocery shopper for the week, or whether maybe it's the person finding the apartment. But that's where having an established congregation really makes it perfect fit. And it also then lifts us all up in our faith and our spirit. Right? We all believe in social justice. I don't think there's a faith that doesn't have a social justice component. And here we are all having a chance to live that out in very concrete terms. So, maybe we can't pass legislation right now. We can advocate, and we can do something for those that are here. And that really does make a difference. So I do think faith communities are uniquely set up for this work. And as long as we also are practicing humility within our own faith, it will be an extremely enriching experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything they want to add? Otherwise, I'm happy to move on. Great. I'm curious if any of you have been involved in resettlement efforts for refugees and asylum seekers in the past, and how this moment compares to that. For me, some of the things that are on my mind are, to what extent has the political climate or the global pandemic or the barrage of terrible and at times paralyzing news that we feel like we've all been experiencing over the last, couple of years, influence the current situation, if at all. So really, if you've been involved before, how does this moment compare? Melanie, I don't know if you want to jump in here.
Sure. I feel like this is one question we could all answer. I mean, in some ways it's the same, and in some ways it's different, like anything. I think, and I alluded to this a little bit in my opening comments, I mean, one positive here, and I don't want to say anything about people being evacuated from their homes is positive. It's not the situation that's positive, but it's positive that Americans know who these people are, what their story is, the fact that the US had a role here, the fact that we have some responsibility. I mean, that has been really different. It's been very difficult to get that message to break through with other refugee populations in the past. So it gives us a real foundation for building support. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't go a million different ways and the politics are nasty and, and this is, and resettling this many people is challenging, no matter who they are, where they come from. So, but that aside, I think we have a real opportunity. And I think the more we could do, and I think we're doing a pretty good job about this, the more we can get stories out, the more we, and not to put people on the spot who have just come here after having lost everything, but those of us who are doing the helping can talk to the press, we can share our stories. And also just, we've been trying to, from our Washington perch, we want the administration to really own this. Here's why we're doing this resettlement. Here's what it means. Here's what it means for Americans to engage in this. Here's what happens to refugees after they have been here for a while, because many of us have those stories to tell, and they're overwhelmingly positive. So I feel like the messaging here is really critical, and we have a real opportunity. So in that way, what's different is that, look, we resettled collectively, all of us, Catholics, HIAS, evangelicals, everybody, 11,000 refugees last year. It's the lowest number ever since the program started. And now we're being asked to ramp up so quickly at a time where it's hard to find staff because of the job, there's so many jobs that are open. Housing, it's ridiculously expensive, particularly where a lot of these Afghan families want to go because they have friends and relatives and contacts. So, that's a real challenge. But again, we also have the support of the communities that my colleagues here have talked about locally who really do want to help. So we have, it's different, but some of the challenges are the same, but some of them are unique to this moment, I think.
I think if I could just add to Melanie's point, I agree with you, Melanie. Having been, doing this work for about 25 years now, the closest I can compare it to is Kosovo. But even then, what's a lot different now is the COVID too. And I'm definitely not blaming anything necessarily on that, but it has made it much harder to also, the hiring of staff locally is a huge challenge for us. And also, this, as I say to people that we're interviewing, refugee work is not remote work. You cannot remotely pick up somebody from the airport. You need to be there. You have to welcome. Maybe we can't hug, but you have to smile big and be present. So I do think, that has made it a lot more difficult. During Kosovo, we had a lot of supports as well. But then too, the housing costs in Boston were a lot different then. And housing, it seems, across the country right now is also in short supply. So as where maybe in the past Boston took smaller case sizes, we're being asked to take families of 8, families of 7, and that, I think that is also a bit of a difference. But in the end, the people are not also different, right? They're all people just seeking a new beginning and seeking safety. And so that part of our work hasn't changed.
Great. Melanie, I wanted to follow up with a comment you made earlier. You, when you were talking about the likelihood that any significant reform bills were going to pass, you said seemed really unlikely, but that we should really be focusing our efforts on the Afghan Adjustment Act. I want to ask the question of like, what happens if that doesn't pass, and what does that mean for this group of people who are in this unique state classification?
Yeah, so it's so without the Afghan Adjustment Act, the Afghan parolees can apply for asylum in this country, but that is very complicated. It requires counsel. Most of these people will win their cases, so it's kind of pointless to go through all of this process to prove that these people are refugees when if you look at kind of where they're coming from in that short compressed time period, it's so I mean, it would be a real waste of time and resources and a real hardship on these Afghans because it's such a stressful and long and complicated, and you have to tell your story multiple times. And so it would be just from everyone's perspective, a huge waste of time and money and a huge addition of stress. And in addition to Catholic Charities and HIAS and others who do the legal representation. So it just, if anything, and there's no upside to it. There's no, well, we should do this because X. It's just, so, and it certainly has precedent. I mean, there was a Cuban Adjustment Act, a Haitian Adjustment Act. There have been a number in the past that allowed adjustment. So, so again, like it doesn't mean that people would get necessarily deported or removed, as we say now in immigration law, but it would create all of this unnecessary stress and hardship and a cost. I mean, you think that Republicans and Democrats could get together around the fact that this would be just a tremendous waste of money. And it's much more expensive for parolees to petition for family members, and it's not a sure thing. So refugees have, under the law, an ability, so as long as the person actually is their spouse or child, parent. I know it's been a while since I actually practiced, but if the person has that relationship, that person can come through as long as they pass security screenings. With parole, it's discretionary, so it's just a much heavier lift. So it's really important for the people who are here after, I mean, given all the uncertainty and all they have to go through already, just to get this enacted. And another reason is that it's just a no-brainer. You know, it's not controversial legislation. It's not, like I said, there's really no reason why we shouldn't pass it other than just the politics of it.
Great. Thanks so much for clarifying that and spelling it out for us. Lucia and Margine, I'm hoping that you could speak about resettlement through the eyes of children.
So yeah, many of the families that we work with do come with young children. And it's certainly, like with everything else, going to be a little bit different for each one of them, depending on their journey, depending on how old they are. But the kids are something that I think about a lot as we think about this work, as I think many others do. And I think about a few things. I think about how for many of the kids, especially the very young ones, the actual experience of coming over here may or may not be something that they fully remember and kind of going through that process. But they are going to have some sort of sense or awareness of the stress of their parents. They are going to have some sort of sense or awareness of whether there are other people in the community that made them feel good, that made them feel like they belonged, that made them feel like they were welcome, that brought them books, that smiled when they engaged with them, even though they didn't understand what they were saying. And so I think a lot about that, in particular, as we do the community sponsorship work, because yes, the resettlement staff certainly, contributes to a child's experience in that way. And there's a lot of work that we do to connect with, the formal services around the schools and, other programs and things like that. But relationships and those kinds of memories, even if they're sort of vague for a child, I think have real strong lasting power in terms of how they're able to develop. And that, that's something that the volunteers and the community groups are really bringing to the table, because they're so often the people who are doing all of those things that I just described and interacting with the kids in that way. And so I just think that that's one of the really wonderful ways that involving the community in the resettlement work enhances what we're able to do to support these families beyond the initial resettlement period, but as they continue to live their sort of journey here, becoming Afghan Americans or whatever, wherever country they come from.
Thank you. Margine, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Lucia summed it up perfectly. Thank you, though.
Great. It's interesting because one of the questions, that was a question from the audience, and we had another question a little bit similar, which is about the networks that exist among the Afghans that are coming here. And I guess more broadly, this question might apply to the Haitians or whom else, whatever group of people are coming. When the resettlement work happens, especially when you're bringing people from with different religious backgrounds or different languages, are they brought, how does it work so that are they aware of the other families that are living in that region? Is there any structure so that they can not just get the support from your organizations and from hosts, communities, and et cetera, but actually that they can build a community with people who come from a similar place to their own?
I can comment a little bit on that, Dalit. With the Afghans, it's a little bit different because Boston is not, Greater Boston is not a destination for the Afghans. Now, if we were in California or Northern Virginia or Texas, there's already many Afghan organizations, businesses set up, but we're a little different here in that, there's some community, but it's limited. So what we have been trying to do, and also being very respectful though of where people are coming from and what their experience was, and that caused that, forced them to flee. I mean, we all know the obvious, but there's other underlying issues as well. So we've been, for the Afghans in particular, working very closely with our community sites to introduce them to each other and ask each of our families, do you want to meet other Afghan families? I mean, and for the most part, it's a resounding yes. Typically, though, with our refugee groups, we try to place them in areas, regions or cities where we can have a decent amount of apartments to put them into community. And that might be, we have some amazing immigrants who themselves are landlords and are very willing to rent to us. And so we've got a great community of refugees in the Dorchester neighborhood of Dorchester, and in other pockets like that. And so we do try to put families together with the Afghans, given that it's so fast. We don't have as much time to build those communities as we would like. But the other thing that we're doing is making sure that our community partners are ensuring that our Afghans have access to the mosques, or for our other populations, it would be to their churches. We are lucky in Boston that we're so ethnically and diverse. And so there usually is a community that you can find. And I would say typically those community linkages end up happening about maybe 3 months in, sometimes a little bit earlier, but usually about 3 months in. Those first 3 months, everything is so fast and people are learning and getting their benefits and all of this situated. And another great way that folks meet each other is through their ESOL classes, their English as a second language classes, and their employment services. And I will say that I think one thing that's been a real sadness during COVID is that all those classes went virtual. And I really strongly believe that our clients missed out on a lot of skills building and just having a community to be with. So God willing, some classes will start to be in person, which I think will be huge for our clients. But that's a very good question. So I don't know if Lucia has anything to add. But.
Great job, Margine.
I'm going to give you, the panelists, an opportunity to ask questions or share any final thoughts. Melanie, I know that you don't get the opportunity to connect with this group here often. I don't know if you have something that you want to share with them or if they have a question for you, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to really speak with one another.
I don't know if I have a question. I wish I could take you guys out for a bottle of wine because I know you probably need it right now. It's, this is a tough time. I mean, our resettlement staff is working 24/7. We also have, HIAS is working with, there's a new kind of approach that's really brand new to kind of stand up some resettlement similar to the traditional resettlement, but kind of scarily without the resettlement agencies, because resettlement agencies are taking as much on as they can right now. And this is such a quick moving target. So we're trying to stand up some direct resettlement with synagogue groups and other groups that can work through HIAS with the support of a funded entity called the Community Sponsor Circle, the Community Sponsorship Hub. So we're really trying to get all hands on deck, but certainly, this is the gold standard. So but there's only so much you guys can do. So I don't know if I have a question right now. I think it'll be really important for all of us to debrief once we get through the next 6 to 9 months, because this will have taught us so much, and talk to the people on this phone that are going to hopefully be engaged or are engaged in the local resettlement efforts. Because we could probably write a book about what we're going to be going through over the next 6 to 9 months or so. And I think this is an opportunity to really build resettlement in this country, rebuild, because it was really decimated. It was such a shame to see, really was a 70-year legal framework for protection, kind of fall apart so quickly, but we held on. And we're here. All of the 9 refugee resettlement agencies are still doing their work. That was certainly was not a given 5 years ago. And I think in some ways we're stronger even with all these challenges. So I just want to thank you so much. And we'll talk once we get through this time where we don't have time to really do anything other than work and welcome people. I think it'll be really interesting to hear each other's experiences on the other side.
Lucia, Margine, Rachie, do you have any either final thoughts or questions for Melanie or things you'd want to share?
Well, as my colleagues know, I'm never without words. I would like to thank Melanie for her leadership and the leadership of our folks that we work with at the U.S. Conference of Bishops. I know you folks are working around the clock as well, and getting our backs has been so helpful to us. And we are really lucky. We have a great resettlement infrastructure. It needs to be rebuilt, but we have one. And I would like to give a thanks to the community here in Boston. Folks, we're doing amazing stuff. And I see some people wanting to get in touch. And I know Rachie and Lucia and I are happy to receive your emails. But I think this is also really powerful. Thank you for including me on this conversation. I don't know if 2 years ago we would have had a Catholic, a Jewish, both resettlement agencies talking all together. So I think this is a really powerful time. And the Afghans that do get to come here, I think, are blessed, as well as all of the other refugees and immigrants that we seek to serve. So thank you.
Great.
I just want to also say that given what Melanie said about how much work resettlement agencies and the folks who are running them and all these efforts are doing, I think for those who are in Boston, you should contact me, not Margine and Lucia, so that they can spend their time supporting the clients and their case managers and all of that. But we're totally happy to be in touch about ways that you can tap into some of the work that is already happening.
Great. And I think we're going to end on that note, because there actually were a couple of people in the chat who want resources and want some direction. And so one of the things that we said as a group prior to this conversation was that we really want to see what kinds of questions and conversation emerged today during this hour, because one of the things we're going to do is send out, as part of the thank you note to everyone who registered, both the link to the recording, but also any resources and instructions for people who want to know more. Because all of these organizations, while we could talk about all of that, they really have like a step-by-step guide essentially for how to get involved and what to do. And so we just encourage you to see that email that's going to come from us, that's going to provide you with opportunities, whether it's to donate your time or other resources. Those opportunities exist. And the exciting thing is that it seems like they're quite coordinated here in Boston, and clearly there's a need. And with that, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us, all of you who I see and all of the people who I know are here with us tonight for this discussion on the current state of affairs for refugees and asylum seekers. We really hope that this conversation was both informative and helpful. We also hope to see you again very soon. In the chat, you're going to see more information about 2 upcoming events that the Vilna is organizing. The first is going to be next Tuesday in person. It's part of our live jazz series with Berklee College of Music students. At 6:30, we're going to be meeting on our front plaza for wine and cheese, very different from something like we're doing right now. And then at 7 o'clock, we're going to come together for an hour of live jazz. The last session in the series was sold out. So if you're interested, I really encourage you to register as soon as possible. And the second thing we wanted to remind all of you of is that on Thursday, December 2nd, we're going to be hosting a virtual talk with Sarah Hurwitz, the author of Here All Along, and Rav Tiferet, who's a local rabbi at TBZ in Brookline, to discuss Sarah's book. Sarah, as many of you know, reconnected to her Jewish identity while serving as the lead speechwriter at the White House for the then First Lady, Michelle Obama. Until we meet again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and we hope you all have a great night. Thank you.